So I think public space is a large part of our identity as individuals, as humans. Public space is at the core of who we are. And I think even if you are a student at a place for only 4 years, that public space, the spaces that you interact with, become a part of your identity. And to dismiss that or acknowledge that as something that, we can stay removed from or not get involved in, I think is incredibly problematic. And so for students that are looking to get involved in this work, it's the same thing. If you're sick, you go to the doctor. If you have an issue, you talk to someone about it. And it's the same with public spaces. If you see an issue, you can't just kind of push it aside and act like, oh, I'm only here for 4 years, it'll go away, because the truth is it's not. And as long as you're a citizen in that space, you have a certain responsibility to get involved. So I would advise that don't be afraid to get involved in something just because you feel you don't have an understanding of it. Certainly you should be, educating yourself on the history and talking to community stakeholders and making sure that you're not jumping to conclusions that might be, false or getting involved in ways that are more harmful than helpful. But don't let the fact that you aren't from that area, if you aren't, or the fact that you're only here for 4 years, deter you from getting involved in something that can make a difference. So go to community meetings, go to board meetings, talk to residents, get a sense of where you're living and what the community is like and how you can make an impact, and ask. If you ask folks how you can get involved, I guarantee there'll be answers to that question that can be helpful in shaping your involvement. So don't be afraid to ask the tough questions, and that's what classes are for, that's what community meetings are for, it's to get those answers. So I've been grateful that my involvements have stemmed from a passion that I have, obviously as a resident, and I have sort of a bit of an advantage there as I don't have to do a lot more of that dirty work, but I'm still asking questions. I'm still, engaging with the community about how can I responsibly be engaged. So there's ways to make it happen if you have the passion and interest, and I think as a student you have a certain responsibility to do so. My advice for people that are dealing with this is just not to be afraid to jump in. I think a lot of times we stand on the periphery and want to get involved or see a need and hope that there's a solution at some point, but we're not willing to get our hands dirty and do that work of really jumping in and coming to some solutions. I think, as I mentioned earlier, students should get involved, but I think aside from that, there's so many ways for community members, administrators to come together and think about creative solutions. That doesn't mean being on the same page, right? That doesn't mean that we all have to think about things in the same way. That doesn't mean that we have to come to a consensus, but we have to be willing to jump into some kind of dialogue with one another, even if it doesn't come to a conclusion that is an easy one. And I think that the difficult conversations are the ones that lead to the most impact. And so we have to be ready to take those difficult conversations into action and not be afraid to, once we know, sort of generally where we want to go, take that follow-up step of making the actions happen and come to light. So, and consistency is key. You can't get involved in something and then fade away, if it gets difficult or if it gets tricky. You have to remain committed to the idea, remain consistent, and really willing to do that difficult work. And so no matter how long that takes, I think it's important for us to recognize that it's not going to be an easy path, but it's worth doing if we're really willing to invest in one another.